Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Rigdon. I'm the director of the University of Arizona Center for the Philosophy of Freedom and an associate professor in the Department of Political Economy and Moral Science. Welcome to this evening's event with our very special guest, Hanna Zack Miley. We have the privilege of connecting with this extraordinary person through the power of storytelling. Mrs. Miley was born in the German city of Bonn in 1932, only 11 months before Adolf Hitler seized power. She witnessed firsthand the antisemitism and waves of terror that reverberated throughout her hometown. Her Jewish parents, Marcus and Amalie Zack, arranged for transport for Hanna on one of the last kinder transport trains out of Germany on July 24th, 1939. This was actually a way that saved 10,000 children. Mrs. Miley would never see her parents again, and she learned that they endured 6 months of inhumane conditions before their murder on May 3rd, 1942, at a Nazi extermination camp. She's here to tell her story. It's a story of survival, of loss, of newfound freedom, forgiveness, and hope. The power of storytelling has persisted throughout history. It's remarkable. It's one of the most extraordinary ways to be able to pass on knowledge and values with each other. Although in education there seems to be new innovative methods for teaching and learning every day, especially as technology continues to evolve, storytelling remains tried and true. It is vital we continue this in education. Storytelling pulls learners in and engages them by building bridges of relevance to their lives in ways that increase their cultural understanding. It makes them exercise critical thinking, active listening, and empathy. Perhaps most importantly, storytelling strengthens our human connection and how we relate to and learn from one another. This is actually one of the reasons why our center launched the Oral History mini-documentary collection. Storytelling is fundamental to the health of our democracy because it employs and enhances the same skills needed for civic engagement. It's the critical thinking, active listening, and ability to connect with each other that make it possible for diverse thought and community engagement to flourish. We are honored to be able to have Hanna Zack Miley here to launch the inspiring and essential 4th installment of our series. Along with the other oral histories, her story offers a valuable first-person perspective of life under authoritarian regimes, highlighting the stark differences with democracy in America. I want to announce tonight, actually, that just this week, the Arizona Board of Education has approved Mrs. Miley's Story of Hope for use in Arizona schools. And I also want to take this opportunity to recognize Tim George, who of George Productions. Would you like to stand? He's been instrumental in filming and in editing production of all 4 of these videos. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you to our partner, Arizona Center for Judaic Studies, for help making this unique opportunity for our center, university, and community possible. I'm also grateful to have University of Arizona President Robbins here to introduce Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, Ben Toma. And a special thanks to Speaker Toma and to his Chief of Staff, Michael Hunter, for introducing us to Hanna. And also thank you to State Representative Alma Hernandez, who's here tonight for a fireside chat with Hanna following this screening. Without further ado, please welcome President Robbins.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see an incredibly full auditorium for this incredible event. Mary, thank you for that kind introduction and for your incredible leadership of the Freedom Center. The center recognizes that democracy is enriched when we learn about and appreciate diverse perspectives. That is central to academic freedom and the foundation upon which we can prepare students to graduate equipped to take on the world's great challenges, and we've got many to take on. Earlier this month, I was fortunate enough to attend the Freedom Center's ESG debates in Phoenix, moderated by former White House press secretaries Robert Gibbs and Ari Fleischer. Although the participants had very different ideologies and different viewpoints, they were also willing to seek common ground for the good of our society. Tonight's event promises to be another timely, thought-provoking, and inspirational event. As an institution committed to fostering understanding and empathy, the University of Arizona recognizes the profound significance of preserving the oral histories of Holocaust survivors. I want to personally welcome Hanna Zack Miley and her husband George Miley to the university and thank them for sharing Hanna's story with us and students across the state as part of the Freedom Center's Oral History Database. Thank you for being here. I was privileged to hear you speak at the legislature, and Speaker, thank you for bringing Hanna to us here on the campus of the University of Arizona. Thank you again to all of you for coming out this evening. I'm confident that Hanna's life experiences and perspectives will be incredibly valuable to everyone who's here tonight. It is now my pleasure and honor to introduce the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, Ben Toma.
Thank you, President Robbins. Appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. It is indeed an honor to introduce my dear friend, Hanna Zack Miley, and George. Not only is Hanna's story of perseverance and reconciliation and inspiration, but her engaging presence and spirited smile have brought hope and peace to so many families who have suffered the trauma of separation, oppression, and persecution. I'm going to keep this really short because this is about Hanna. And I would just like to say now, please join me as we turn our attention to the screen. Thank you.
I was born on the 18th of February, 1932, and Hitler took power early 1933. And that was bad news for Jews. Even early on, there was a kind of sense of danger around us, which only increased. Antisemitism was awakened. I think it was buried deep in the culture already, but it was nurtured and brought out. There was the articles in the newspaper. There were the cartoons showing how evil the Jews were. The population was being influenced first by words, and then the actions came. It was the first movie showing of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It was the first time that I was going to go to the cinema, and obviously I was very excited, and there was another girl taking me. I was maybe 7, and she was 10 years older. And we walked to the cinema, and as we approached, of course, my anticipation grew, but then I looked at her face, and she looked startled and afraid. And then she read out the notice outside the cinema, "No Jews allowed." And we couldn't go. The Kristallnacht was the time it became openly violent. My parents, very late, realized what was going on. The reality became real to them that there was the possibility of death. My father had access to a rescue effort for children. The rescue effort's name is Kindertransport. And my father found a place for me on the train, and I left Germany just weeks before World War II started. 10,000 children were rescued by the Kindertransport. Contrasting with that, 1.5 million Jewish children perished. Young people today bear heavy burdens, many challenges, but my story is a story of hope, and I want to give you hope. My greatest memory of life as a small child, even from very early on, was incredible love. We were Jewish, and I think that it's something about the Jewish culture that you are very expressive. And so I felt the warmth, the closeness, the touching, the affirmation. Many of the stores in the main street were owned by Jews. My father had several businesses. One was a household store with quite on the main street with 2 large display windows. The law was passed that Jewish businesses had to be sold at a very low price to Gentiles. And I was standing very close to my father, and we looked down the stairs, and the new owner of his business was a Gentile. He was a German. And I looked down and I saw his face, and this man's face was angry, and out of his mouth flew words that were so filled of hatred. It was like bullets hitting us. And I looked at my father, and he was silent. I can remember thinking, why doesn't he say something? Why doesn't he do something? Why doesn't he protect us? My father is silent. And I thought for a long time that my father was a weak man. And now, when I look back, I realize how utterly strong he was. To remain silent was to protect us. If he had resisted, things would have been much worse. So that was a very personal example, but all over Germany, and even in places that Germany ruled, like Austria, Jews were experiencing the beginnings of persecution. There were gradual things, like at school. I began school, and it was the local Lutheran school. And we used to have arithmetic books that counted colorful balls, spinning tops, and it made the subject somewhat interesting. But then suddenly one day, our books changed. And instead of counting and adding and subtracting balls and tops, we were counting tanks and guns and helmets and marching soldiers. And looking back, I can see how the whole nation was being indoctrinated with militant ideas. My father's store was on the main street and we lived above it. So we had a front row seat when Hitler came to town. There was built a castle. Hitler had the intention of building castles to replace medieval castles, to represent the wonder and the power of the Third Reich, which he said would last 1,000 years. 6 kilometers above our little town, Hitler's castle, Vogelsang, was built, and he came for the opening. This castle, the purpose of it was to train German officers in racial philosophy. And many of the graduates from that college went to the east, and some of them were commanders of the concentration camps. It was a big event locally, and Hitler came to the opening of the castle. He arrived at the little train station in Gmünd and got into an open car, and he traversed from the train station through the center of our town up the hill 6 kilometers to the castle. And we were in our apartment. My parents, I remember, were sitting against the back wall, pressed against the back wall on the sofa. I was a very precocious child, and I was pressed with my nose to the window. And I saw the local crowds. I saw young women in dirndl dresses with long blonde plaits, throwing flowers in the air. It was a procession. And I saw the population on the sidewalk with their arms up, Heil Hitler. And then the car came through, and he was in the back. I think about the effect on our town. I think we are very affected by leaders, the role of leaders in indoctrination of the population. It was a gradual thing, and I think this is a huge warning about the speech and the despising the other, holding other people in contempt. It was a gradual, step-by-step process. So first, there was the indoctrination, there was the media, there were the films, there was the music, there was the speeches, there were the spectacular events showing the power of the National Socialism and the Aryan myth, the superiority. Many Jews, including my father, they said to each other, "This is crazy. This can't continue. Surely Hitler and those who are his henchmen, this can't last." And you know, Germany had always been very proud of their culture, their history, their intelligence. They had these intellectuals and the arts. How could a people with this kind of culture deteriorate to the depths of inhumanity? So I think my parents, like the many other Jews, felt this couldn't endure. This is not possible. But it did endure. It got worse and worse. And I actually remember lying in bed and hearing an argument between my parents. My mother, very full of anxiety and passion, saying she can't go. And my father insisting I have to go. And, you know, because my father prevailed, I'm here telling this story. You know, I think about how convinced my father was that this was the only way out, because they could no longer find a place outside Germany. It was too late. Like many Jews, they came to the realization that they wanted to leave, but actually there were no countries that would take them. That's a very sobering thing when we think about refugees. The fact that they could find no place to go. I believe my father had access to a rescue effort for children. The rescue effort's name is Kindertransport, and my father found a place for me on the train, and I left Germany just weeks before World War II started. 10,000 children were rescued by the Kindertransport. Contrasting with that, 1.5 million Jewish children perished. But when I look back, I think about how it must have been for my parents to make such a decision. I've described how I was the only child of elderly parents, and their kind of focus of love. I mean, what did it take for a parent to give their child away, not knowing what would happen the other end? I think I didn't realize all that was happening. And my mother put a label around my neck. That was my identification. And there was a number on that round label. The number was 8814. And when I think that it was 10,000 children that were rescued, I realized that I'm actually quite late in the list. And indeed, it was shortly before all freedom possibilities closed. I remember we had a lift. That was a real big deal to have a lift in your home. And I remember going down in the lift with my parents and stepping out of the front door. And the next memory I have is being at Köln Hauptbahnhof, Cologne main train station. And the platform was very crowded with people. My parents helped me up the steps. At that time, the trains were steam trains, and there were very big steps. I was a small child, and they had to help me up the steep steps. And I remember turning around and looking at them. My parents had told me I was going on a nice trip. I think they told me that in order to get me to go, because if they had given any inkling of their own despair and agony about it, I would have made a big scene. It would have been very difficult. So they wanted to ease the way. So I was kind of really okay with everything. But then I looked round and I saw their eyes, and they were crying. And that was the moment that I realized this is not a nice trip. And then the next memory is sitting inside the train, crunched in a corner. And of course, the other children had differing reactions. And they were running up and down, very excited. There were hardly any adults around. I think there were just a few Red Cross workers. And I remember somebody saying, "Can't you behave like this nice little girl sitting there?" But I actually wasn't behaving. I was deep in despair. And it was the moment of trauma that would affect me for many years. I shut down emotionally. How does a child of 7 deal with the loss of every bit of security? So my method was to just put a lid on it. It was shortly after that the war was declared. And so around me in England was great anxiety because, you know, in England, there was great fear that Germany would invade and that they were not ready for that. Germany had already defeated all those European countries. So how could England, this little island, be safe? So here I was, surrounded by people who had somewhat anxious minds. I was aware that I was a foreigner. I was a German. And so what I did, I tried to fit in. I tried to conform to how other people behaved. I tried to become a nice little English girl and do the English things. So on the outside, I conformed and I tried to talk in the same way and act in the same way. But inside, I was Jewish, but I was also full of anger and hatred that churned within me. I carried a lot of anger towards Germany and Germans because I realized that what had happened in Germany contributed to my losses. But also, when I look back, I think about what kind of things were in the newspapers, what was on the radio in England. You know, Germany was the enemy, so they were described in very dark ways. And so here I was, you know, it was like a split person, but it fed my own attitude towards Germany, what had happened to me. But added to that is a very almost like shameful thing that I tell. I felt my parents had abandoned me. Now that was my child understanding. You know, I felt they had just let me go. And, you know, you question love. You know, did they love me? Why did they let me go? And it's only now, and the years after this, that I realize the kind of love they displayed was self-sacrificial love. It was really very pure. I became a teacher in a small town in southern England, and gradually my capacity to contain the turbulence that was inside became more than I could cope with. I think for so many years I had been operating in denial and suppression, attempting to fit in, to conform. I had increasingly realized how sad I was inside, and it became almost unbearable. And it was at that time I was teaching, I was loving the environment. You know, we were in a country area and it was so peaceful and there was so much beauty around, and I was with a class of children who were actually eager to learn. It was a country school, and I enjoyed what we did together. But inside, I wondered, is this good enough? Am I really able to do this? I had a lot of self-doubt, but on top of that, my anger and rage became a burden too much for me. It was like I was at the end of my rope. And it so happened that at that exact moment, that I heard for the first time that I could give that to my Heavenly Father. And I did it. You know, I did it because I had no other way out. And this was like a door opened. It was a rescue effort of my soul. And, you know, that was the beginning when I really started to live. Now, what do I do with the memories of what was done to me? What do I do about my feelings about my parents? In my mind, in my heart, I started to revisit what had happened. And having the anger and bitterness lifted from me, mentally I began to focus on those who had wronged me, in reality or in my perception. But you know, it's one thing to kind of mentally say, I forgive you, when you're thousands of miles away from what happened. For me, the big difference came in going back to Germany. I returned to Germany. I went there with my husband, and we went to the places in the town where I had sad memories, like the cinema or the street where Hitler had traversed. And gradually I began to meet people who had known my parents and known me as a baby. What do I do as a child of Holocaust victims? I went on the journey, and I had 8 friends and my husband who accompanied me. And the 10 of us traveled where my parents traveled. And we stopped at the incinerator at their very end, where they were burnt. Knowing can be very painful, and I was a bit afraid of what I would find out. But I'd come to the place where I needed to know. And we made an appointment, and we sat in this room. It was full of papers and books. And this very lovely German woman, I would say she was probably about in her late 50s, very gracious. She searched in the computer. I gave as much information as I could, and out comes the paper. And then she looked at me and she said, I'm very, very sorry to tell you this, but your parents were deported to the Łódź Ghetto. They spent about a year there, and then they were gassed in Chelmno. And Chelmno is a very small place in Poland that was dedicated to death. It was not a work camp. And the method of killing was asphyxiation by the exhaust from a truck. The Jews were pushed into a truck, and the exhaust the pipe had been changed to go inside the truck. And as the truck was driven to the forest, to a prepared place, they gradually died. And when they reached the forest, there was this large pit where the bodies were burned, and she gave me the date and the details. And so I felt her compassion. words forgiveness, repentance, reconciliation all revolve around a core issue, justice. I think without justice, forgiveness is, you can almost say it's a mockery. I think even little children have a sense of justice. You know, they say that's not fair. And, you know, justice, is there justice? We have to have justice. We desire justice. There isn't an ease without it. But when we look at the world around us, I think there's a great famine of justice. I think for me, to be able to forgive means that I believe there will be ultimate justice. And for me, I believe that God is just, that I don't have to exact revenge. I don't have to have revenge on those people who burnt our synagogue. I don't have to have revenge on the people who pushed my parents into the gas truck. I surrender that to God, who is just. It doesn't mean I deny what happened. What happened was evil. It was the darkest evil. And you know, I think this is a question that confronts most of us today. I mean, there is evil in the world today. How do we deal with it? For me, I feel so grateful. I feel as though my life has been given back to me because I was able to trust that God would be in control of the ultimate justice. And I also was aware of all the wrongs within me that I have been forgiven of, and that I've been given this gift of forgiveness. The freedom began with a change in my heart. You know, my early days and my youthful days were very much engaged with battling the demons within. And so I think freedom starts with an inner peace. And so where do we get that peace? And we can look for the peace in escape or engagement with different things. But the big question about freedom is the freedom of the heart. And I think it's only when there are people who are free internally that can, actually we're talking, even when we talk about freedom, about love. How do we love one another? I mean, that is something we all agree on, isn't it? That really, the golden rule, the message to love one another. But how do we have the capacity to do that? I think freedom begins with dealing with our own inner demons. And I feel like my story is a warning. And what would I say to young people? Be alert. Be aware of what's going on. Look beyond, like, when I was a child, I just looked at my little narrow life experience and I say, look outside, see what is happening around. And I want to tell you that my life, I offer my story to say, help is available. Young people today bear heavy burdens, many challenges, but my story is a story of hope, and I want to give you hope.
Well, first of all, I think I have to thank Hanna for that very lucid testimony. As you might gather from the slide, I'm David Graysworth from the UArizona Center for Judaic Studies. It's a privilege not only to sit with Hanna, but also to introduce my friend Alma Hernandez to my left. Alma was the first Mexican-American Jewish person elected, and she became also the youngest woman ever elected to the Arizona House of Representatives in 2018. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees in public health from the U of A. She has a degree in public health and a master's in law and economics with further public health training from Johns Hopkins. She's a faculty member at ASU's College of Nursing and a full-time law student going into her third year. And 3L, or is it, or L3? Before being elected, Representative Hernandez worked at the Jewish Federation of Southern Arizona, leading the Jewish Community Relations Council. She was a co-founder of Tucson Jews for Justice and has been an outspoken advocate for the U.S.-Israel relationship since she was in high school. She's been a fierce defender, a fierce supporter of Holocaust education. She was named one of the Forward's 50 most influential Jews and was listed on the J100 list of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life by the Allgemeiner. Hernandez is serving in her third term in the Arizona legislature. So with that said, I need to address a procedural aspect. You can see a QR code right up here on the screen. If you wish to present a question, I ask that you do it, with relative brevity, just so we can accommodate a large number, and do it by scanning the QR code and then typing your letter into the website. I'm going to be, awkwardly holding my computer so that I can see the questions that come in, and I will relay them as of 6:50, I believe. This is when I'm told I have to do it. 30 minutes from now. So thank you in advance for that. So Hanna, I don't know if you care to share any particular thoughts now that you have seen yourself again on the screen. Alma, I ask you for the same. I don't know if you have any special, any immediate reactions.
Shall I start?
Go.
It's really a very strange experience to see yourself talking about the most very intimate things, your inner experiences. But the whole process of making this film actually was an amazing experience. It was quite awesome, the way that I was cared for. You're very vulnerable in these circumstances, but I must say, Mary and everyone else connected, it's just been an enormous support. And the other thing I would say is that I would like to really thank you for coming out to watch this, and also all these people on live stream. It's very affirming. And I feel that doing this tonight is actually very significant in our time. The film was about the past, but we're living in a present that is, I would say, when I speak for the Jewish community, it's very anxiety producing. But there is also a lot of fear all around beyond that. So I think it's a really interesting timing that we should be together looking at this tonight. And I realize that it's a one-person, very personal story. But I also realize that in the audience, we also have experienced trauma. I think this is a very broken world. And so there is the drama of the Holocaust, and then we can mention the other national traumas, but traumas are often very intimate within the family. And we're all sitting here with our own personal history. So I would just like to kind of underline the ending and say, my hope in telling the story is to encourage people not to be buried in escapism, but to really look at what's happening around. And also to learn from the past. I think we have a gift in all the research that's being done today about what actually happened. And so I would just say, please tell your children and encourage them to look at history in order not to feel superior, but to look what we can learn. And I think, finally, my greatest hope is that my sharing of the story will create reconciliation.
Thank you for that. Alma.
Yeah, I first want to start off by thanking everyone who made it out tonight. I really appreciate it. And I want to just quickly acknowledge my sister who walked in the room, Representative Consuelo Hernandez, for being here, and thanking her as well. I want to just thank you, Hanna, for allowing us to really learn more about you, and your husband for sharing you with all of us, of course. But it's really important, especially during a time of so much hate and division that we're seeing right now. It's really important for people to hear these stories, right? So I want us to talk a little bit about what you see and what you feel by sharing your story, how we're going to prevent the continuous rise of anti-Semitism and hate that we're seeing all over the country today, and around the world. If you could just share a little bit about how you perceive your story being able to help change that and combat that.
I would say that my little story, I'm also aware that although we're a big group and everything, it's just a little tiny drop in the ocean. So I don't have kind of big ideas, but I do feel very driven to tell it, because I think every single person actually is here for a purpose. And I'm 92, and I'm just totally astonished to have such an opportunity. And then I think about the potential in this room. I mean, we are from so many backgrounds, and we are also engaged in different areas of society. But I would say, search out how you can bring reconciliation into your area. And I understand it can be very difficult. In my story, I don't think my family or I were thinking about reconciliation, we were thinking about survival. But I believe that we now have a space in which to do that. This is a very significant time when we can engage and look about virtue. How can we be noble people? How can we be virtuous people? And for me, as I said in the film, it's something outside myself. I don't see my individual person as having the answer. I received the grace to forgive. And so I would encourage everyone to seek the source of wisdom, the source of love.
Thank you for that.
We've received numerous very good questions, which I'll get to in a moment. If I may just share with you the following reaction. It's a reaction I have almost in every instance in which I'm called upon to interview a survivor or deal with the Holocaust. People speak somewhat rather vaguely about the lessons of the Holocaust. And of course, there are universal lessons. One thing that strikes me is that there are lessons specifically for Jews. One of them, especially for those of us who come from families of survivors or escapees, is that Jews have a responsibility to themselves and to others to be aware of their own potential, and thank you for mentioning potential, to embrace and cultivate their own power, and to utilize their power to preserve not only their lives, but their dignity. And I'm wondering how you react to that particular lesson, if one may call it that.
I think that is very beautiful, actually. But my problem was, how do you do that when there's a lot of stuff going on inside you? I think we want to talk about not symbols or like speeches or ceremonies. They have a significant place. But I think my question for Jews and for Gentiles is, what is the heart? How can we find inner peace? Because I think some of the outer turmoil is an expression of what's going on in people's hearts.
Thank you. That's very shrewd. I'm almost, I feel obligated to mention, since you brought up the subject of growing anti-Semitism in the United States, that, of course, Jews find it not only, shall we say, nurturing, but actually very important to call upon others to do the right thing, to stand against hatred. Friends such as Mary from the center, friends such as President Robbins, and I dare say Arizonans have every right to be proud that President Robbins has stood very recently, and I hope I'm not, I hope I'm not embarrassing him, has recently stood against anti-Jewish hatred very openly. Because I'm not going to pontificate here, I'm going to go ahead and read a couple of the questions that have arrived, and I think they should give us plenty of food for discussion, even though it's relatively early. One question that came in reads as follows: how did you, Hanna, manage to maintain faith in God and godly justice in the midst of what you faced? How did you speak with moments when your faith may have wavered? How did you speak? That I'm quoting. Yeah.
You know, again, I've been privileged to live to the age of 92. And, you know, I wrote, one thing that really helped me was writing my book, because that made me examine the past. One of the things that helped me was to face the past.
Yeah.
You know, it was while I was in this denial and trying to make myself a different person and disconnect from my roots that the turmoil continued. But one of the ways out was to go back, and the subtitle is One Jewish Survivor's Long Journey to Forgiveness. So it's not like my whole life I've had this freedom and peace, and I had this encounter, but that was just the beginning. I think one of the things, if you really, to be really honest, one of the things that has been a huge influence on me is the Bible. And the reforming of my thinking. And I would say I am not a perfect person. I still have the need to forgive and to be forgiven, but it's so mitigated from that all-consuming hatred.
Yeah, yeah. Peace is a hard-earned quality, in a sense. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Thank you. By the way, Alma, feel free to jump in whenever. Yeah.
I did want to touch on one thing. So in Arizona, we've worked really hard, and Speaker Toma has been very instrumental and helpful on this as well, is making sure that we mandated Holocaust education here in Arizona. And we did several years ago. And I'm really proud of that accomplishment. I always tell my parents, if I don't accomplish anything else in the legislature, at least I know that I worked really hard and we got that done. Because as many of you probably remember, it took several years to get to that point. So I wanted just to touch a little bit about, we're talking about the importance of combating hate and, talking about forgiveness, but also I think it's important to discuss a little bit, and that's what I want you to touch on education about the Holocaust, especially with the younger generation. Right now we're dealing with a lot in this world, a lot of hate, a lot of denial of the Holocaust, unfortunately. So I wanted you to just explain to everyone who's here, from your point of view as a survivor, why it's so important for us to not give up on pushing for Holocaust education, and why that's even important and relevant today. If you can just touch a little bit about that.
I think that's a very significant discussion. And, watching the movie, I saw actually the reverse, because in the German schools, the textbooks and the teaching of the children actually evoked the distancing, the hatred. So I think the things we teach and the things we learn do influence our worldview. And so I would come from that, the fact, look what happens if the reverse is taught. So, for me, to come from Arizona and to know that this has happened, that we are going to be teaching about the Holocaust in the schools, I think it's very important, because children begin from very young to form their life views. And, I think that's why it's so significant. The films that you all are making, that's going to affect things, because most children in Germany are taken to museums and to Auschwitz. In the film we talked about this place in Cologne where I learned about what happened to my parents. It's actually a large building that used to be the Gestapo headquarters. And today, there are historians researching what happened in the city of Cologne to the Jews. And there are permanent exhibitions and new exhibitions. And if you visit there, you'll see buses coming up, German school children getting out of the buses and being taken around the museum. It's part of the educational system to educate about the Holocaust. And, it influences across, beyond anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a virulent root, but, there are all sorts of hatreds. I mean, think about what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. This is, it's going to affect us all. But think about what's happening to Ukraine. So this virulent hatred and making the other is not limited to anti-Semitism. So I really applaud everything that's happening here in the area of education.
And I think that's really important, because, as they say, it starts with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews. And I think that's one really important factor, and you've mentioned it in your story, in your book, and also in the film. You talk about how it's gradual, right?
Yes.
And you talked about how that hate is taught. You're not born hating, you're taught the hate. So just to wrap that part up, I want to touch on one really important piece and something that a lot of us are seeing right now, which is the re-traumatization, I would say, of people, individuals like you who are survivors, who have experienced horrors before. And when we are talking about students on college campuses or out on the streets, whether it's in Arizona or in LA or in New York, and you're hearing, chants of go back to Poland, and you're hearing these very hateful remarks that perhaps some individuals will never understand why it's hateful or why they're hurtful. And I just want to hear from you how, as someone who has gone through so much in your life, how you're coping with the trauma that is now being brought upon individuals like you.
I think one thing I do is I read the New York Times and I watch all the things on YouTube to get every point of view, not the bubble, But I think what you're saying deep underneath, the root is, am I a victim? I think victimhood is a really huge issue today. And I think victimhood imprisons us, and it leads to despair. And it also leads to revenge. So I can only say I really felt I was a victim. And it's really interesting because those things that happened to me, I really was a victim, but it kind of transfers over. So I would really feel victimized if somebody jumped in line in front of me. That was in England where we do the lines, But, it just goes across the board. So I think one thing that affects the sense of victimhood is if we feel that we are being cared for. We're not alone. We're not helpless. We have, for me, I have a Heavenly Father. And that it's not like a little saying, it's real. I really believe it. I felt very nervous coming here to talk in front of you spontaneously. And when you're 92, this is like the end of the day. But, I feel strengthened to do this. So it's not a direct answer, but that is the real thing.
And Hanna, you don't look a day over 21. So I hope we all look just as fabulous when we are 92.
Okay.
But no, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You've spoken to some of the questions that came in. One of them from a German viewer is he or she feels a special responsibility to deal with the rise of anti-Semitism, and he or she asks, what can we do today? You may wish to expand on what you already said. There's another question here which also is interesting. You mentioned, quote unquote, ultimate justice. Can you comment on what you believe ultimate justice is?
For me to comment on ultimate justice, I would have to say that my information comes from the Bible, and that this is not going to end badly. I think the outcome is very hopeful, but I also think sometimes the difficulties that we all face can produce character within us. I look at some people and what they go through, and when I watch them and I watch their endurance and their patience, I see a development of something really lasting and worthwhile in the person. I really feel that if our lives are just full of triviality and pleasure, it doesn't produce depth and roots and character. So that is another very hopeful thing. it can be very bad. But what is really effective is our response to those things.
If I may, what I see in you is an approach to responding that is very outward in its direction. And I think that's fundamentally constructive, you know, when we focus on what is superficial, what is simply generating dopamine or something like that, it ultimately ends up being shallow. And I have to say this, I've noticed this very strongly in the wake of October 7th. My colleagues and I in Judaic Studies, several of whom, by the way, are Israelis, have all come to the conclusion that in one way or another, we're all traumatized, in some cases re-traumatized. And what seems to shield us from the worst despair is not a kind of passive reception of negative information, which is, of course, you know, a legion, but rather a conviction that we are here to do something. And it's not something that's simply good for us, it's good for other people. We promote understanding, we promote, and we tell stories. I mean, in many ways, I'm a historian because we're all wired, in a sense, to tell stories, to implot reality as stories, and to present them as such. So thank you for that, that insight. One respondent says, there's a lot of hatred and division in the world. What are some ways that you suggest that we break through this division and hatred? Only easy questions, yes?
Yeah. I think the questions reflect how really people are thinking about the situation today, and it's really. Yeah, I mean, I would be very interested to hear. You know, here I am spouting, but I mean, there's a lot of wisdom in this room, and. I don't know. What can I say? Say it again, I've forgotten.
Yeah, so hatred and division of the world, what are some ways that you would suggest that we employ to break through division and hatred?
I think to start where we are. I mean, to start forgiving one another in the family, in the workplace, in the wider family, in the community, you know, work in the political sphere. Well, I mean, I admire anyone with the fortitude to be a politician these days, you know. How can you as an individual be honorable and speak truth in love? So start where you are. And, you know, I also feel you know, with some of the issues of protest and everything, both camps, people, it kind of is almost like satisfying to get on board a particular issue, because actually we're escaping our own issues. You know, we feel an enormous righteousness in condemning the other person, but I feel there's a great need for humility and listening.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there's a terrible you know, reticence about acknowledging one's vulnerability. How do you? Well, I mean, you know, the questions are along the lines of, how would you solve world peace and humanity's problem? You know, it's a bit too much. I mean, you've gone through some of this in the film, of course, but I mean, given the depth of the pain that you had to endure, how did you come to a place where you, in a sense, embraced, if not the vulnerability itself, the need to grapple with it? Is there some way in which you could articulate that may be transferable to, let's say, to the experience of a not yet fully mature, you know, teenager who is undergoing a great deal of suffering?
You know, I think that I can't solve everyone's problem, and I can't solve the problem.
Really?
I don't have it. But all I can offer is, you know, what happened. And I think, you know, it started at this encounter that I wasn't alone, and my own shame in myself was lifted from me. But one big factor was actually going back to the place and meeting people. And you know, I did meet people where it was unresolved.
Yeah.
But actually, even though they could not come, we couldn't come together, my going and facing that was a big step.
Yes.
I'll give you one example. My husband and I went back to this little town where we were, and I don't know if you remember in the film, there's this big glass window, and it's very ironic because that picture is of the recent times, and the last kind of shop that was in that place that my father had was a party shop, and you saw the pig in the window, which always, I think it's really weird because, you know, the pig is so unclean for a Jew. So that picture, but the person who took my father's business place, that it was bombed, but he stole the ground that it was built on. We actually met, and you know, he could not come to the point of seeing what his father had done and what he was involved in. But for me to release him from that, I didn't hold the revenge. You know, I didn't need to have it back. But the reason I could do that is because I thought my Heavenly Father is caring for me. And when I look back on my life, I see how much I've received. I don't need that piece of land. But so that's one thing, you know, you can have in your family a person who's really wronged you, and they're not ready to say that, but you don't need to be a victim of that person any longer.
Yes, there's a lot there. I think what you mentioned with regard to the exposing oneself to the locus of trauma, the physical locus of trauma, is very significant. I'm by no means an expert on the matter, but I do know that people who are actually help to cure trauma through repeated exposure by taking the power of the hurtful environment, in a sense, away, or by dulling it, if nothing else.
And I did have one question. I look around the room and I do see some college students that are here joining us today, and I appreciate you all. I know you're getting ready for finals, so thank you for taking this time to be here and having the opportunity to hear directly from Hanna. It's always amazing. I tell people all the time, it's incredible that we can still hear stories from those who are still with us today. And obviously, it's great to have it on video so that those who aren't able to hear you now can hear you someday. But what is your message to those students that are here today, who many are probably feeling like I am myself feeling, being on campus, really frustrated, quite frankly hurt, and a little lost as to everything that's going on right now? What is your message to those students who are experiencing something like this for the first time, where they're being hated for simply just being a Jew on campus? What is your message to those students today?
I would say that I don't think many of us in Germany did it awfully well. I don't think we were greatly successful. But and I don't have a lot of answers because we're experiencing danger and the possibility of violence locally in localized places, but it's really a big picture. I think we have to look, for example, at who are the big people pulling the strings. I think about Iran, and there's an awful lot of suffering. I don't deny the suffering that is going on among Palestinian people. I'm very realistic about the tunnels and Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. I'm also very realistic about Israeli politics, but it is so wrong to attack individuals. I mean, deeply, deeply wrong. But I pray for America. I pray for what's going on.
With that in mind, I thought I should read one question that came in. What does Israel represent for you now? Do you feel safer because of Israel, because it exists?
I feel that without Israel, we are bereft.
Okay. Another respondent says, did you finish your
Yes,
answer? Okay.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm winding down.
Quote, my father has always stressed the importance of remembering the Shoah as part of our Passover Seder. Parenthetically, Shoah means something like catastrophe. As one of my friends, a rabbi, says, it's not properly speaking a Holocaust in that Jews were not sacrificed, although we saw great instances of self-sacrifice. They were murdered. Anyway, so this father always stresses the need to remember the Shoah as part of the Passover Seder, the ritual meal for Passover, which is just now ending. Do you have any suggestions for particular texts or prayers that you'd like to include in your Pesach practices that you would be willing to recommend?
I think Alma should answer that. I would just say, this definitions, Shoah, Holocaust, is a little bit controversial because for a Jew, it's better to say Shoah because like you said, Holocaust means a burnt offering, and that is really near the bone, isn't it? So I think to say Shoah. But what would you say?
I would say that at least for this Passover, many families around the world truly made sure that they remembered those who are currently still not home.
Hostages.
All the hostages. So I know that that was one thing that was added that's obviously not traditional, but was added this year was either an extra chair at the Seder table or something to symbolize the fact that there are still many individuals in the tunnels who we don't know if they will ever come back to their families. Yeah. So I think that that's one important thing is remembering that while everyone is gathering for celebrations and such, that there are still a lot of people, as you said, that there's great suffering going on.
Yeah. We don't have much time left, so let me combine a couple of queries that are perhaps less heavy. I'm struggling for words. How did you meet George? and share the path of life that led you to Arizona.
Wow. Well, George and I met in a youth organization, and we were married in India.
Oh, wow.
And we've been married how many years?
52.
52 years.
Feels like just a few days.
And you watch the movie,
everyone take
and
notes.
I talked about going back.
The men.
Yeah, I went back to Germany, all that. But I couldn't have done it without him. He was there every step of the way. And as is often the case in marriage, one partner is the emotional and deep feeling and spontaneous, George is the objective, organized. So we couldn't have even got there, I think, without him.
So thank you to George,
Yes.
it sounds like.
Yeah, no, we definitely all need companions who nurture us and who help us, and who in a way cancel us out, as you put it. One respondent would like to ask where, as a 7-year-old, you found the strength to continue after you became aware of what happened to you and to your family.
When I think about it, I think, how did I do it? You know, in the film, I talked about the intense love of my parents. There was peace in our home, and I felt their love. And you know, the first 7 years of a child's life is very significant. Mm-hmm. So, you know, they couldn't do anything after the age of 7, but those 7 years, I think they gave a grounding and a stability. And in my mind, how I did it as a child or a teenager was to grit my teeth and do it, you know, but you can only do it like that for so long.
Yeah.
Tension.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the energy to go on. That's a scarce commodity sometimes. Yeah. I agree. Do you worry, this is another question, do you worry about humanity in the near future when Holocaust survivors are no longer able to connect the abstract devastation of the Holocaust with the enduring nature of what created it? If I may, you know, arrogate this privilege, to connect the abstract devastation of the Holocaust with the microscopic, with the personal, with the human.
You know what actually encourages me, because the number of actual survivors is shrinking. There are very, very few. Is the amount of work that is being done in remembrance. You know, there's a longer film being made of my life, and the team, one of the members of the team is here, has just been to Poland. And I am astonished what is happening in the academia in Poland in researching. Yeah. There is so much information that we didn't know. And in Phoenix, there is this focus on this new Holocaust remembrance. And there are many creative ways that are being explored for remembrance. You know, there's holograms and different ways. Yeah, yeah. And I think in a way, the shrinking number of actual witnesses is driving a deeper desire. We must know and we must preserve this. So I think it isn't all negative, you know.
I want to give Alma perhaps
I was just
one
going
of the
to
last
say to that
words.
point.
Yeah, yeah. Please.
To that point, just to put it out there, currently at the Arizona House of Representatives, I introduced a bill. I had several sponsors, Toma, which was one, and my sister as well, to be able to get the state to help kick in some funds, to be able to make sure that flourishes and that we can continue teaching about the Holocaust in Arizona by building the first ever Holocaust History Education Center. So we're currently working on that, so call your representatives and encourage them to please make sure that this is in the budget. Yes. That's just a plug, but it is really important because it's a lot of the work that she's also doing down in Phoenix and around the state to make sure that we're able to continue to share the stories of the survivors even when they're no longer with us. So call your members, make sure you ask them to please support and do what they can to make sure that we can get some state funding for this important project.
More good news. And you'll have the last word, don't worry.
And the governor.
There's
yes.
no way you're not having the last word. But my unit, partly inspired by Alma's work in the legislature, now given added impetus by you and your story, we are in the process of completing an endowment for an academic chair in Holocaust studies, human rights, and comparative genocide. Yeah. So you didn't know this, but thank you. Are we pretty much at an end, Mary? Yes. So why don't we close up by giving you something of a last minute or two to say whatever comes to your heart.
Well, look, I think this is the most amazing audience. There is so much synergy happening, and I want to thank you. And I want to say that there's more to the story than, you know, the thing had to be edited, but even then, it was more of it. So we do have copies of this book, which is going to be available.
It is right outside, yeah.
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 Special event price.
Her spokesperson here.
Yeah.
There is a special event
see,
price for the book.
Absolutely.
What is the price? $10.
$10. Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'll sign
Excellent,
it, yeah.
excellent. Thank you, Alma. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, President Robbins. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you as well. and thank you all. Thank you, Hanna.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's water if you need
Are
water.
you gonna say
Yeah.
Were you gonna say a few?
Okay. That was perfect. Great job. Thank
Oh, thank you.
This is bracelets that we made in our Holocaust education program.